She had a sparkle about her that shined from within.
She just had everything going for her.
Everybody wanted to be around Danielle. They loved her.
She made you feel happy.
And he was someone who filled her with that same happiness.
He had just come back from overseas.
They had this instant chemistry.
He was very nice to her and catering to her.
But just when things seemed perfect, their future is shattered by a violent attack.
I was laying on the floor with her until they came.
I don't think I've ever been that devastated.
As investigators begin examining the fragments of the night's events, they'll shine a light on the splintered details of a love gone wrong.
They knew something was off.
They had a love triangle on their hands.
Man, I'm trying to figure out what the hell going on, bro.
But when the case threatens to implode,
He realized that he has lied to them.
I looked at him, and I said, I said, I look like a demon.
police fear it will be impossible to discern the truth from the lies.
He's going to try to kill one of them, or they're going to kill him.
He told detectives, what I have to say, you're not going to believe.
I was like, oh, hell no. Ain't nobody gonna believe that I wasn't the one to pull the trigger.
You shouldn't be killing people just because your feelings are hurt. That's weak.
February 11th, 2009. As the holiday hustle fades, citizens of Jacksonville are looking forward to a new year on Florida's eastern coastline.
Jacksonville is a big city with a small town feel. One of the really cool things about living here is a lot of people know each other.
We have a pretty thriving downtown, a lot of entertainment in the city center.
It's a place where you feel the love, you feel, the excitement.
But at 3 p.m., 56-year-old Janice Stubbs is starting to panic.
Jacksonville 911, Hodges. Yes, I need to get an officer.
She calls the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office to report her daughter, Danielle Stubbs, missing.
Danielle had made plans to go with her mother to actually go shopping.
I was sitting at home, and I was waiting for her to call me, and she never called. And I'm like, what in the world is going on?
When's the last time you saw her? Yesterday at 4 o'clock.
So all day long, I'm worried. And I call her phone. She never answered the phone, nothing.
Is it out of character for her to go missing? It's very out of character. I'm going to send a police officer out to you.
Danielle's mother tells police that she and her family are going to wait at Danielle's townhouse until officers arrive to assist them.
I just looked at my husband and my son. I said, let's just go.
Minutes later, the Stubbs family arrives at Danielle's home.
As soon as they got there, they noticed that her car wasn't in the driveway.
And when the parents knocked on the door, they couldn't get in. They didn't get a response.
Danielle's family tries to be patient for police arrival. But as time ticks away, the family only becomes more concerned.
Like any mother, Danielle's mother is getting very impatient, so they actually call again.
Jacksonville 911. Yes, they haven't came out yet. I'm really nervous. The officer has been assigned, but they're on another call right now. I really need to get this in motion. Okay, ma'am. The officer will be there.
With no idea when police will arrive, Danielle's brother decides to take action.
No, I can't wait no more. I'm going around back.
Her brother decides, you know what, I'm gonna go look around on my own. He goes to the back of the house, finds the door unlocked, goes inside, and then goes to the front door to open the door for his parents.
Danielle! Danielle, is she here?
Danielle!
Is she here?
They were calling out for Danielle, got no response, so the brother finally went to check the bedroom. When he went into the bedroom, he saw what no one would want to see.
Danielle's brother found her on the floor in her bedroom.
Oh, no, no! No!
Did you find her?
Did you find her?
Danielle's family makes another desperate call to 911.
Jacksonville 911. Sir, what happened?
Danielle's brother can barely communicate.
Since she was a child, Danielle Stubbs made it a point to always look her best.
Everybody, people I didn't even know, would be like, oh God, that girl, she's just so beautiful. So that was her little nickname to the community, Miss Beautiful.
When I first met her, to be honest, I was a little intimidated. She was so pretty. She kept her hair, her nails, her outfits always together.
She was very much a girly girl. She had lipstick on, wore makeup, loved eyelashes, just pretty things.
She never went out the house without her bracelets, and she always had on a heel. She rarely wore tennis shoes.
But while Danielle had incomparable style, it wasn't the only reason people called her Miss Beautiful.
Her personality, she's beautiful inside and out. Everybody wanted to be around Danielle. They loved her.
I didn't know anything negative about Danielle. It was crazy. She was very giving.
She made you feel happy.
When 26-year-old Danielle wasn't spending time with family or friends, she was putting in long hours at work.
She was actually working 2 jobs.
She worked full-time in hospital administration in the emergency room at Jacksonville Naval Air Station.
The doctors there, they really enjoyed being around her.
And then she also worked with her mother at their family business in the beauty salon.
She did hair at her mom's shop. She was a braider, but she did a lot of other styles as well, too.
Danielle was really independent. She fully supported herself and just genuinely enjoyed her life.
Danielle, she took very good care of herself. She made sure she always kept herself together. She never asked anybody for anything. She was an awesome person.
Like many women in their 20s, one of Danielle's favorite pastimes was enjoying the nightlife her city had to offer.
Danielle was living the life of what most girls her age would do. She was not married yet, but certainly dating and enjoying going out with her friends.
And in the spring of 2008, a typical night out would change Danielle's life forever.
Danielle was out with some coworkers when she met 24-year-old Justin McMillan.
Hey, that next round's on me.
Oh, thank you.
When Danielle and Justin met, they had this instant chemistry.
No, you really didn't have to do that.
A beautiful girl like you deserve it.
He was very nice to her and catering to her.
It was so easy for them to just open up to one another.
The two of them talked for hours.
He had just came home from being overseas. He spent 2 years in Iraq working with the military as a personal trainer.
Justin was originally from Georgia and had 2 young kids that still lived there with their mother.
So he disclosed all these things to Danielle about what was happening in his life. He had been separated from his wife, and apparently that marriage was ending, but he still wanted to be able to spend time with his kids.
He was feeling a little bit lost. He had just moved back to Florida and was staying with some family until he kind of figured things out.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Divorce is so hard.
Danielle had just this big heart and a giving spirit.
If you need anything, I'm here for you.
That means a lot.
From there, the relationship between Danielle and Justin took off.
Justin was staying with Danielle quite frequently.
She was having fun. He was just doing what she needed him to do to make her feel secure in a relationship.
I think Danielle liked that Justin had a lot of time for her. He was open to going to family functions and just basically being a good boyfriend to her.
They even discussed getting engaged after Justin's divorce was finalized.
But now Danielle's panicked family is on the phone with 911 after discovering her lifeless body on her bedroom floor.
I just found her dead.
Okay, where was she cut or shot or how was she killed?
I don't know, she's in the cover of blood.
The police are on the way and the ambulance as well.
At that point, she was already gone. And I just started rubbing her back, rubbing her back. And I was laying on the floor with her until they came.
Police arrived within minutes.
It's so clear that this woman has died a very violent death, and there's nothing they can do to save her.
I was kind of in shock. I was trying my best to see, was she gone? I just could not believe it.
Who could have done this to Danielle?
In the winter of 2009, 26-year-old Danielle Stubbs seemed like she had it all.
People called Danielle Miss Beautiful, and it was quite evident that she was beautiful inside and out.
And with her handsome boyfriend, Justin McMillan, by her side, the sky was the limit for the couple.
These two really hit it off. Everything just was working. It was like a match made in heaven.
But just hours after reporting her missing, Danielle's family has made a heart-wrenching discovery. Danielle lifeless on the floor of her bedroom.
For us, we were in shock. My baby was gone. She was gone.
The shockwaves from Danielle's death echo throughout the community.
I don't think I've ever been that devastated. I hadn't really experienced that kind of hurt.
It was just very devastating. It was more hurtful for me to just see her family just torn apart like that, to be honest. It was just hard.
Homicide detectives are determined to get to the bottom of this tragedy.
Their objective at that point was to process how it happened.
They've noticed multiple gunshot wounds, one in the arm and one in the head.
Police found 2 spent .45 caliber shell casings around Danielle's body and collected it as evidence.
Investigators immediately rule out robbery as the motive for this crime.
They noticed there weren't really any signs or obvious evidence of showing like someone had broken into her home.
There's no signs of forced entry or any valuables missing. So at this point, it's more likely that Danielle was killed by a person that she trusted and had access to her home.
Back at the station, detectives reach out to one of those trusted individuals, Danielle's boyfriend, Justin McMillan.
He had called the police station several times asking to speak with them while they were at the crime scene.
Hey Justin, how you doing? I got a couple messages to give you a call.
Yeah. I don't, man. I'm trying to figure out what the hell going on, bro.
He said as soon as he heard the news that Danielle was gone, the first thing he did was call Jacksonville police.
Okay. Well, good. Well, then maybe you can help me out a little bit. Is there anything maybe that you might be able to tell me that might be able to help us? When's that last time you've actually seen her, talked to her?
It was probably about 6 o'clock Saturday evening.
About 6 o'clock the night before, she invited him to go out with her along with her co-workers out to a club, and he declined the offer.
Justin claims that he went to spend time with his family, and Danielle was supposed to call him when she got home.
This is crazy, because, I mean, she told me she was going to call me as soon as she left the club because she wanted me to spend the night with her.
Right.
Because I was leaving. I was just going to move back to Georgia.
Justin explains that he and Danielle had recently decided to end their relationship.
Due to Justin having personal business, I'm assuming with his kids needing to go back to Georgia, that was going to be the end of them.
Justin said that it was an amicable breakup, that there was no hard feelings.
I mean, you can ask any of her friends or parents, man, we have not gotten into one altercation. Right.
But Justin says he never heard from Danielle that night.
Justin tells detectives that he was supposed to hear from Danielle before the club closed, but when he didn't, he decided, okay, well, I might as well hit the road and head to Georgia.
So what time do you think you was out of Jacksonville?
It was maybe 2.
He says he's been in Georgia ever since, but got worried when he hadn't heard from her.
So is there anything that you know, maybe someone has been upset with her, or people she's been hanging out with, or anything?
All right, it was this guy.
He mentioned a gentleman by the name of Drew Elder, her co-worker.
Drew was one of the co-workers Danielle had been out clubbing with on the night of January the 10th.
Justin didn't really have a good feeling about Drew.
Justin said he was very disrespectful to him.
In fact, Justin tells detectives he and Drew had a tense run-in just a couple weeks earlier.
About, I'm gonna say 2.5 weeks ago. I was driving her car because she took my car and went to the beauty salon. And I was at the gas station. Went to go get me something to drink and a pack of Black & Mild.
It was then that Justin ran into Drew.
He was like, hey, that's Danielle's car? And I was like, yeah. He was like, damn, she doing it like that? I was like, what you mean, man? Well, I mean, what's up?
Justin was always concerned about Drew with Danielle because he felt that he was too flirty, or he felt that he had a crush on Danielle.
I said, man, what you talking about, man? So he got in the car with his little homeboy and they left or whatever.
Justin said Drew was definitely bad news.
But is he capable of murder?
It sounded like detectives had a love triangle on their hands.
Detectives in Jacksonville, Florida are speaking to Justin McMillan, the ex-boyfriend of 26-year-old murder victim Danielle Stubbs.
So is there anything that you know, maybe someone has been upset with her, or people she's been hanging out with, or anything?
Justin said on the night that Danielle went missing, she had been out with some co-workers, including a co-worker by the name of Drew Elder.
And Justin has nothing good to say about Drew.
Justin told detectives that he was a little bit too flirty when it came to Danielle. He didn't trust him.
It sounded like a classic love triangle.
Detectives are eager to hear what else Justin has to say, but know they need to continue the conversation in person.
You know, it's a shame I can't go into, great details over the phone. I don't know how far in Georgia are you, but how long would it take you to get to Jacksonville?
2 hours.
2 hours, okay. Would you mind meeting me somewhere? Maybe I can show you a couple things and I can be done with you and I can move on.
Yeah.
Detectives asked Justin if he would come in to the station, and he said absolutely.
As detectives wait for Justin to arrive, they turn their attention to Danielle's co-worker and alleged admirer, Drew Elder.
If Drew really wanted Danielle, it's no telling how far he would go, especially if she refused his advances.
It doesn't take long for detectives to track down Drew and bring him in for questioning.
He seemed shocked to learn that Danielle was found deceased.
I just saw her the other night. I can't believe she's gone.
They asked Drew, did he and Danielle ever have a romantic relationship?
He admitted that he was attracted to her, and when Danielle told him that her and Justin had broken up, he became excited.
Broken up. I was happy about that because it meant I had a chance with her. Sure.
Detectives ask Drew to give them a timeline of his night with Danielle.
Drew says they met up at their co-worker's house at 9 p.m. and he drove all three of them to the club and they just had a good old time and danced the night away.
The three ended up staying out super late until the clubs basically closed.
He decided he would take her home to make sure she got home safe.
And give her the ride home?
Of course.
He did get the feeling that she was into him, and maybe their friendship would become something more.
We got there around 3:30. She got out and went inside. And that's it.
You never went inside her place?
No.
Drew was adamant that he just stayed inside the car.
Drew swears to police that he thought she was the most beautiful and amazing person. He swears he didn't kill her.
Did you see anyone else around when you dropped her off?
Well, there was a brown Cadillac parked outside.
Police asked him, could he tell if there was anyone inside? But he said he couldn't because the tent was too dark on the car.
If Drew wasn't responsible for what happened to Danielle, could the owner of the brown Cadillac be involved somehow?
At this point, Drew was still one of their prime suspects, and they weren't even sure if he was telling the truth.
But when detectives dig deeper into their new lead, they make a chilling discovery.
They find that Justin McMillan has a brown Cadillac registered under his name.
When detectives spoke with Justin, he said he was already in Georgia at the time. So who was telling the truth, Drew or Justin?
Investigators hope surveillance footage can give them the answers they need.
Detectives go to all of the gas stations located near Danielle's home to collect whatever surveillance video they could find.
If they caught Justin's brown Cadillac on camera at one of the local gas stations early that morning, it's likely that Drew was telling the truth.
And detectives are in luck.
Wait, pause it right there.
They found just what they were looking for.
Detectives see Justin's Cadillac pull into a gas station.
They see video footage of the man get out of the brown Cadillac that matches the description of Justin McMillan.
The time signature on the tape showed him pulling the car in at 4 a.m.
2 hours after he said that he had left town.
They realize that he has lied to them. Now, the investigators are anxious to hear how he intends to explain this 2-hour difference.
But even though Justin was supposed to arrive in Jacksonville hours ago, detectives are still left waiting.
Justin told detectives that day that he would meet with them once he drove back to Florida. So detectives called Justin to see where he was.
I'm getting ready to head back in a few minutes now.
Oh, are you really?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I don't have nothing to run from. I don't have nothing to hide from.
No one's saying that, Justin. We're just trying to figure out what's going on, and if you can help me, that'd be great.
However, by the next day, Justin still hasn't shown up.
Detectives sit and wait, and time just continues to go by. They call, they get no answer.
He never came.
Since it appears Justin is evading them, their only option is to bring him in by force.
He can run, but he can't hide. But in order to track Justin down, they incorporate the help of the U.S. Marshals to do a manhunt search.
Once U.S. Marshals are on the case, they quickly zero in on their target.
On the afternoon of January 14th, 2009, the police locate Justin at a house in Jacksonville. They did surveillance and found that he was leaving the home, driving the brown Cadillac.
Marshals pulled behind him and turned their emergency lights on in an effort to pull him over.
He pulled over, seeming to comply, but opened his door and launched off in a full run.
The marshals engage in a foot chase, yelling at him, telling him to stop. Justin refuses to give up.
But the situation takes a violent spin as Justin resists arrest.
Justin turned to the police officer and shot in the direction of the patrol car. The U.S. Marshals returned fire.
He figured he would go down in a blaze.
On January 14, 2009, authorities in Jacksonville, Florida are attempting to apprehend the man they suspect murdered Danielle Stubbs, her ex-boyfriend, Justin McMillan. But the Air Force veteran isn't going down without a fight.
He doesn't want to be caught. He's going down in a blaze.
He shot at the police officers.
Fortunately, none of the marshals were hit by Justin's gun. However, Justin had suffered several gunshot wounds.
Hey, we're gonna need medical out here ASAP.
Justin was hit 6 times, and that's when he was apprehended.
Although Jacksonville detectives are relieved to finally have Justin in custody, his injuries will definitely complicate their investigative process.
Justin is rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Detectives don't know whether or not he'll survive this incident.
If Justin dies, then the truth behind Danielle's murder could be a mystery forever.
Doctors do everything they can to keep Justin alive.
He underwent several surgeries. He was also put into a medically induced coma.
Meanwhile, investigators compare the bullets collected from the shootout to the ones found in Danielle's bedroom.
The casings that were found in Danielle Stubbs' apartment came from a .45 caliber handgun, the same type of gun that was collected at the shootout with the U.S. Marshals.
With all of this evidence pointing towards Justin, what detectives want now is a confession.
And 2 weeks later, they'll get their chance when Justin awakens from his coma.
On January 29th, detectives from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office met Justin in his hospital room.
Justin, hey man, how you feeling? Doing better? Okay. When we talked on the phone, you remember talking to me? Yeah. I want to go back over a little bit of that with you.
But when prodded by detectives, Justin stands by his original story and claims the last time he spoke to Danielle was around 10 p.m. on the 10th.
Seems like she went on some finished work.
Were you mad that she was gone? No.
He said he hung out with his family in Jacksonville that night, waiting for Danielle to call after she left the club, but she never did.
I stayed up until about 2. Went to the gas station. Put some gas in my car. I went to tour.
However, the surveillance video shows otherwise, that he was still in town at 4 a.m.
Detectives let Justin know that they know he's lying about getting on the road at 2 a.m.
You know that little gas station right around the corner from her house? You're on video in there. You went inside. Your car's actually out in the parking lot. But this is at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Realizing he's caught in a lie, Justin admits he was outside Danielle's home when Drew Elder dropped her off at 3:30 a.m.
He said he still loved her and wanted to say goodbye before he left to go back to Georgia.
You wasn't mad? There's nothing wrong with being angry. That's just it's a human emotion.
No. Okay, what happens from there?
Inside. Passenger said have fun.
He said she seemed to be very happy to see him. They went upstairs.
Did you already have the gun in the house at that time?
Who was upstairs with me?
I'm gonna miss you when I have to move back to Georgia. I'm not ready to say goodbye.
I know.
Justin said he laid down to go to sleep with Danielle, and the next thing he knew, he blacked out.
I remember just for fun. Everything was just blank. Everything was quiet.
And Justin says when he came to, he was horrified by what he saw.
She wasn't moving.
2 weeks after his violent shootout with police, Jacksonville detectives are finally speaking with murder suspect Justin McMillan.
They shot him 6 times and his ass still didn't die.
Justin now claims he woke up on the morning of January 11th to find Danielle dead.
Did you try to wake her up or move her or help her? Justin, look at me. Did you panic? Yes?
Yes.
And you leave? And you don't dial 911? You don't Call family.
What is it? I really don't.
Saying you blanked out ain't gonna cut it. You a healthy man. The military.
Detectives are tired of hearing the lie, so they let him know that they know that he's not telling the truth, and they have evidence to prove it.
Detectives tell Justin that they sent the bullets from his shootout with U.S. Marshals to be tested against the bullets found in Danielle's bedroom.
What do you think the results were? It was a match. Yeah. Now you're in a tight situation right now, okay?
At this point, Justin is beginning to realize that the walls are closing in.
We know the rest of the answers, okay? We know the where and the who and the what and the how, but why? What happened in there that was so bad that you had to shoot her? Was it her being dropped off by the guy? I mean, honestly. Huh? Is that what it was?
Justin can't take the pressure any longer.
He now admitted to being angry when he saw Danielle's co-worker, Drew Elder, drop her off.
Justin claimed to police at that time that he was angry that she had been out with another man.
He waited till she went inside, and that's when he went in behind her.
Like, you think you can just sit there and disrespect me like that?
We aren't together anymore, Justin. I can do whatever I want.
What?
They had a fight. I'm sure they had a fight. Danielle was a fighter.
That's when I lost you.
Huh? Thought about him? And you lost him? What happened? What happened?
I shot.
He was like, ain't nobody gonna have you if I can't have you. That's how he thought in his head.
And then what? Shot her again?
That's when Justin admits he fired the fatal shot into her head.
She was shot twice, so he meant to kill her. He literally meant to kill her.
Once Danielle was dead, he just walked out. He went to a nearby gas station to fill up his car and then left for Georgia.
I wish none of this would have happened. I deserve to be punished.
Yeah, probably so.
Detectives tell him that he's going to be charged with the murder of Danielle Stubbs, as well as attempted murder of U.S. Marshals.
Word of Justin's arrest spreads like wildfire.
Once he went to jail, they caught him and everything. We saw it on the news, and people were calling. I mean, it was a big time. It was a big thing in Jacksonville.
It was a sigh of relief, but at the same time, I knew it wasn't gonna bring my friend back.
With Justin McMillan's confession now on record, investigators are hoping for an easy conviction. But as the trial looms closer, they get an unexpected call from the Duval County Jail.
While awaiting trial, Justin asked to speak with members of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office.
Detectives sit down with Justin again, this time in an interrogation room.
I ain't seen you since you was at the hospital. You looking a lot better, like I said, man. You putting on some weight. Look like you're healing up, okay?
He told detectives, what I have to say, you're not gonna believe.
It's pertaining to that night.
Okay.
I didn't pull the trigger.
He changed his story entirely.
Jacksonville detectives have finally obtained a confession from Justin McMillan for the murder of his ex-girlfriend, Danielle Stubbs. But while in jail awaiting trial, Justin makes a shocking announcement.
Justin suddenly decides he wants to recant his story.
I didn't pull the trigger.
Police asked Justin, well, why did you confess to it then at the hospital? And he acts confused.
Justin says that he was on so many painkillers that he doesn't even remember talking to the detectives.
You know?
He's claiming that during the hospital stay, he was on too much medication to give a statement.
They had me on selling drugs.
Well, they really didn't.
They really didn't.
I'm not going to dispute that with you. I mean, we get the hospital records.
In fact, the hospital record showed he'd only been on Motrin at the time that he gave his initial statement to the police.
So if you're not the one that shot her, then who's the one that did? Who would be responsible for it?
I don't know.
Justin explains that when he went to Danielle's home on January 10th, he was just stopping by on his way to Georgia to pick something up he'd left there, his pistol.
I have my pistol upstairs. I hope ain't nobody in here.
Mm-hmm.
So I go upstairs and I say, Danielle, I don't hear nothing.
Danielle.
He says that's when he saw her deceased.
My pistol was laying on the bed because I left my pistol there.
Justin tells investigators at that point he just panicked.
But she wasn't moving. I was like, Danielle, she didn't respond. So I was like, oh, hell no. Okay. I grabbed my phone and I left. I mean, at the time, I knew nobody wasn't gonna believe that. And I know now ain't nobody really gonna believe it.
Justin was essentially claiming that someone else killed Danielle with his gun, framing him for the crime. It's just ridiculous.
Did it ever cross your mind to call for some help?
Because
that's going to be the obvious question.
It crossed my mind 1,000 times. Ain't nobody gonna believe I didn't pull the trigger because I got the weapon. It's my weapon. You see what I'm saying?
He swears that he is telling the truth.
But detectives aren't buying it.
This is the third story that Justin had given police now, and they had just run out of patience for him.
Detectives tell him at this point it's going to be up to a judge and jury.
In June of 2010, Justin gets his chance to plead his case in court.
Justin McMillan goes on trial for the murder of Danielle Stubbs and the attempted murder of U.S. Marshals. He knows that he's facing the death penalty.
The trial, I didn't want to look at that man. I didn't want to see him, but I looked at him. And I said, it looked like a demon. That's what I said, it looked like a demon.
His defense team realized with the ballistic evidence against him, as well as his original confession at the hospital, they would never be able to convince a jury that he did not shoot Danielle.
So instead, they attempt to at least save him from the death penalty.
During the trial, the defendant did make the decision to testify. He admitted again to shooting Danielle. But the defense had a theory of the case that this defendant at the time was just suffering from what we would call a depraved mind.
Justin's defense team argues that since he shot at Danielle in the heat of passion, that he shouldn't get the death penalty and that he should get second-degree murder.
However, the prosecution is ready with a rebuttal.
What the state argued was that it was the defendant who shot Danielle, first shooting her in the right arm, an injury that she would have likely survived, and then he made the decision to shoot her in the head.
After just 6 hours of deliberation, the jury comes to a decision: guilty on all charges.
He's convicted of first-degree murder and given the death penalty as a result.
But just 2 months into his sentence, Justin still isn't willing to accept punishment for what he's done.
Justin attempts to escape prison.
And while Justin's attempt at escaping prison is unsuccessful, he is able to escape the death penalty.
The death penalty law did later change in the state of Florida, and at this time, Justin McMillan is serving life in prison without the possibility of parole.
For those that loved and cherished Danielle, Justin's conviction and subsequent sentencing offers little solace.
It was a relief with the guilty verdict. But at the same time, though, my daughter is gone.
January in Edmonton does not just bring the cold, it brings a heavy, suffocating freeze that locks the entire province of Alberta in a bitter, unyielding grip. On the morning of January 23, 2024, the thermometer outside hovered deep below the zero mark, casting a pale, silver haze over the North Saskatchewan River. The breath of commuters rose in thick, ghostly plumes as they hurried from their vehicles toward the warmth of indoor spaces. Streets were lined with jagged banks of plowed snow, and the sky above was a dull, slate gray, offering no warmth, only a stark, sterile light that reflected off the glass facades of the downtown core. Inside the towering, geometric structure of Edmonton City Hall, the atmosphere was a sharp contrast to the freezing wilderness outside. The building, with its grand glass pyramid ceiling, was designed to be an open, welcoming monument to democracy, a place where the public could wander freely, where accountability met transparency. On any given Tuesday, the soft echo of footsteps on polished stone floors, the gentle clinking of ceramic mugs from the cafeteria, and the low hum of civic workers discussing zoning laws or snow removal budgets formed the predictable, comforting rhythm of local government. But beneath that mundane exterior, a silent, dark current was already flowing into the heart of the building. Deep within the shadows of the underground parking arcade, a concrete labyrinth beneath the structure where the air always smelled faintly of damp cement and exhaust fumes, a man was preparing for war. He did not look like an outsider. In fact, to anyone passing by, he looked exactly like the people hired to keep the peace. He wore the familiar, dark, structured jacket of a professional security guard, a uniform designed to project authority, safety, and order. But under that jacket, his heart hammered against his ribs with a frantic, ideological ferocity. In his hands, he carried a heavy, black canvas duffel bag, its weight pulling hard against the straps. Inside that bag lay a Soviet-designed SKS semi-automatic rifle, a rugged, lethal piece of military history capable of tearing through flesh and bone with devastating speed. Alongside it were 3 prohibited overcapacity magazines, packed tightly with nearly 150 rounds of live ammunition, and 4 crude, heavy glass bottles filled to the brim with amber-colored gasoline, their necks stuffed with rags. The man, a 28-year-old named Bezhani Sava, stood in the dim light of the parkade, his eyes wide, reflecting a chaotic mix of absolute conviction and desperate terror. He took a long, shaky breath, the cold air burning his lungs, before stepping toward the heavy service doors that led directly into the public spaces above. Upstairs, on the 2nd floor, a committee room was filled with the quiet murmur of official business. Mayor Amarjeet Sohi sat at the head of a large horseshoe-shaped wooden table, surrounded by city councillors, administrative staff, and local journalists who were adjusting their audio recorders and notebooks. They were gathered to discuss an emergency management plan, ironically debating how the city would respond to hypothetical crises, completely unaware that a real one was walking up the stairs toward them. Just down the hallway, the high-pitched, joyful laughter of first-grade children echoed through the open atrium. A class of 6-year-olds was on a field trip, their small boots clicking brightly against the tile as their teacher guided them through the historic halls, pointing out portraits of past leaders and explaining how a city functions. The children were wearing bright, mismatched winter coats, their faces rosy from the outdoor walk they had just completed. The transparency of the building meant that from the grand staircase, one could look through the massive glass partitions and see the daily life of Edmonton unfolding in real time. It was an environment built on trust, an architectural promise that the government belonged to the people. Then, at exactly 10:30 a.m., that promise was violently shattered. The first sound was not a shout or a warning, but a deafening, metallic crack that ripped through the quiet atrium like a lightning strike. The sharp, concussive boom of the SKS rifle detonated within the enclosed space, the sound waves slamming into the hard stone walls and multiplying into a terrifying, rolling roar. For a fraction of a second, time seemed to liquefy. People froze, their brains struggling to process the noise, searching for a benign explanation, perhaps a fallen piece of heavy equipment or a blown transformer. But then came the second shot, and the third, a rapid, rhythmic succession of explosions that left no room for doubt. Crack, crack, crack. High above the ground floor, the massive glass panels that lined the second-story walkways began to explode. Shards of heavy, tempered glass rained down onto the lower lobby, cascading like a glittering, lethal waterfall, chiming musical but terrifying notes as they smashed into thousands of tiny, razor-sharp pieces on the floor below. In the committee room, the mayor and his staff felt the vibrations through the floorboards before they fully comprehended the noise. A journalist's pen slid off the table as everyone instinctively ducked, their eyes darting to the doors. The low hum of political debate was instantly replaced by the raw, instinctual sounds of human panic. Cell phones clattered to the floor, chairs scraped violently against the carpet as people threw themselves underneath desks, and the air grew thick with the sharp, acrid scent of burnt gunpowder. Down the hall, the teacher of the first-grade class reacted with a desperate, maternal speed, grabbing the nearest children by their coats and shoving them into a nearby storage closet, her voice a hushed, trembling command for them to stay silent, to hide, to disappear into the dark. The children, confused and terrified by the thunderous booms and the sound of breaking glass, began to weep softly, burying their faces into each other's winter jackets. On the second-floor balcony, Bezhani Sava stood amidst the smoke he had just created. His face was flushed, his hands gripping the hot barrel of the rifle as he scanned the empty space below. He was not aiming at specific people. Instead, he was firing wildly into the architecture itself, striking the ceiling, puncturing the drywall, and shattering the very symbols of civic order. The heavy smell of cordite hung in the air, a grey, chemical fog that began to drift toward the glass pyramid above. But Sava was not finished. Dropping the heavy rifle so it hung by its sling, his trembling hands reached into his tactical bag and pulled out one of the glass bottles. The amber liquid sloshed violently inside. With a flick of a lighter, the gasoline-soaked rag burst into a bright, snapping orange flame. He raised his arm, his muscles tensing, and hurled the Molotov cocktail over the balcony railing. The bottle sailed through the smoky air of the atrium, spinning end over end, a streak of fire against the grey backdrop of the hall. It struck the hard tile floor right in front of the main elevator banks with a loud, wet smash. The glass disintegrated, and the pressurized gasoline instantly ignited into a roaring sheet of fire. A wave of intense, blistering heat radiated outward, blackening the pristine stone floors and sending thick, oily ropes of dark smoke billowing up into the rafters. The fire alarms began to wail, a piercing, cyclical shriek that synchronized with the flashing white strobe lights throughout the building, turning the peaceful civic center into a chaotic, sensory nightmare of smoke, fire, and gunfire. Through the haze, the figure of the gunman moved like a ghost, his security uniform making him look like a savior while his actions proclaimed him an executioner. Every person trapped inside that building was forced into a desperate gamble for survival, hiding behind office doors, pressing themselves against the floors of windowless rooms, listening to the echoing footsteps of a man who had brought a military rifle into the heart of their city. Wondering if the next sound they heard would be the door handle turning. It was a moment of absolute vulnerability, where the thin veneer of civilization was stripped away by the pull of a trigger, leaving hundreds of innocent citizens trapped in a frozen winter wonderland that had suddenly become a hot, smoky combat zone. To understand how a young man could walk into the heart of Edmonton's civic government with a military rifle and a bag full of explosives, one must look closely at the environment that raised him and the quiet, creeping isolation that defined his final years. Bezhani Sava was 28 years old when he stepped onto the second-floor balcony of City Hall, but his story began much further away from the snowy plains of Alberta. Born into a world often fractured by global instability, he was part of a generation of young men who grew up in the shadow of the digital age, where local grievances could easily become entangled with massive, international conflicts through the medium of a glowing screen. When he arrived in Canada, he entered a society that prided itself on being a peaceful mosaic, a place where immigrants could rebuild their lives away from the trauma of geopolitical strife. Edmonton, with its sprawling river valley, its industrial resilience, and its vast, quiet suburbs, offered the perfect backdrop for a quiet, inconspicuous existence. For several years, Sava lived that ordinary life, moving through the city unnoticed, just another face among the thousands who commuted daily into the downtown core to earn a living. In 2019, Sava took a step that many young men seeking stability and structure choose. He applied for and secured a position with Commissionaires, one of Canada's largest and most well-known private security firms. The company, which historically employed military veterans but had expanded to include civilians, offered a sense of identity and purpose. For Sava, putting on the dark, structured uniform jacket with its official patches was more than just gaining a source of income. It was a way to belong to something larger than himself, a way to project an image of protective authority, discipline, and societal value. He was a regular employee, trusted enough to be assigned to various properties around the city, though he was never officially stationed at City Hall itself. To his colleagues and supervisors during those early years, he was a quiet, reliable worker who showed up on time, followed protocols, and rarely caused any friction. He was the kind of person who could stand in a lobby for 8 hours, fading into the background of daily commerce, completely invisible to the busy professionals rushing past him. However, beneath that calm, professional exterior, a profound internal shift began to take place as the years rolled toward 2024. The world was changing rapidly, and for a man spending long, solitary hours on security shifts, the internet became a dangerous echo chamber. The post-pandemic economic landscape of Canada was marked by a crushing inflation crisis, where housing costs skyrocketed, grocery prices soared to unprecedented heights. And a growing sense of desperation began to settle over young working-class individuals who felt the promise of a stable future slipping through their fingers. Sava, watching his own struggles and those of the people around him, began to internalize these systemic pressures not as complex economic shifts, but as deliberate, malicious injustices perpetrated by those in power. His quiet nature turned inward, curdling into a deep, obsessive resentment against the very institutions he was hired to protect. He began to spend his off-duty hours consuming vast amounts of alternative media, diving deep into online spaces where global tragedies and local hardships were woven into a single, grand narrative of oppression. The spark that seemingly ignited this dry tinder of resentment came from thousands of miles away. As global conflicts escalated, particularly the devastating violence in the Gaza Strip, Sava's online consumption became hyper-focused on the suffering of distant populations. In his mind, the local economic struggles of people in Edmonton and the horrific geopolitical violence occurring on the other side of the planet became inexorably linked, both seen as symptoms of a corrupt, uncaring political elite. He began to view the local government officials, like Mayor Amarjeet Sohi and the city councillors, not as municipal managers dealing with transit lines and property taxes, but as complicit gatekeepers of a broken global system. This radicalization did not happen overnight. It was a slow, microscopic erosion of his grip on reality, taking place over months in a small apartment, illuminated only by the cold blue light of a laptop screen while the bitter Alberta winter raged outside. He began to plan a manifestation of his rage, transforming himself from a passive observer into an armed actor on a stage he would build himself. The choice of Edmonton City Hall as his target was deeply symbolic. The building itself is an architectural wonder of transparency, featuring massive glass walls and a soaring central pyramid that allows natural light to flood the public spaces, signifying an open government accessible to all. To Sava, this openness was a vulnerability he could exploit to maximize the impact of his message. In the days leading up to January 23, he meticulously prepared his gear, treating his impending assault with the cold, methodical precision of a military operation. He acquired a semi-automatic SKS rifle, a rugged, highly reliable weapon capable of firing high-velocity rounds, and modified his kit with 3 prohibited overcapacity magazines to ensure he would not have to reload frequently. He mixed gasoline in heavy glass bottles, creating makeshift incendiary devices designed to spread terror through fire. He did all of this while continuing to wear his security uniform, a grim irony that allowed him to move through the world without raising suspicion, hiding a devastating plot beneath the very fabric designed to symbolize public safety. In a traditional true crime narrative, this is the moment where we would look into the lives of the fallen, tracing the final footsteps of an innocent person whose life was cut short by senseless violence. We would speak of their childhood dreams, their families' enduring grief, and the empty chair at the dinner table that serves as a permanent monument to a tragedy. But the story of the Edmonton City Hall shooting defies the conventional structure of a crime broadcast in one profound, almost miraculous way. There were no physical casualties. There was no grieving family forced to identify a body in a cold municipal morgue, and no obituary printed in the local newspaper the following morning. Yet, to say there were no victims in this case would be an egregious misunderstanding of what transpired on that freezing January morning. The victim in the Edmonton City Hall plot was not a single flesh and blood individual, but rather the collective psyche of an entire community, the stolen innocence of a group of school children, and the violent desecration of a sacred public space that belonged to every citizen of Alberta. To find the true victims of Bezhani Sava's ideological rage, one must look inside that dark storage closet on the second floor, where a classroom of first-grade children spent what felt like an eternity pressed against each other in the pitch black. These children, barely 6 years old, had woken up that morning excited for a day outside the classroom, a chance to see where the leaders of their city made decisions. Instead, their introduction to civic life was the deafening roar of a high-powered rifle and the smell of burning gasoline. The trauma inflicted upon those children does not show up on an X-ray or a coroner's report, but it leaves an indelible scar on the developing mind. 4 weeks after the attack, parents reported their children waking up screaming from nightmares, terrified of loud noises, and crying at the prospect of returning to school. The sudden, violent shattering of their safe world transformed an ordinary Tuesday into a lifelong psychological burden. Their teacher, who carried the terrifying responsibility of protecting 20 young lives while a gunman roamed outside, became a victim of a secondary trauma that lingers long after the drywall is repaired and the broken glass swept away. Beyond the children, the victims were the everyday civic workers, the administrative assistants, the translators, the security guards, and the local journalists who went to work that morning expecting nothing more than the mundane frustrations of municipal bureaucracy. When the first shots echoed through the atrium, these people were forced to confront the very real, immediate probability of their own violent deaths. The terror of hiding under a desk, listening to footsteps approach, and wondering if a bullet will pierce the thin particle board of an office door is a form of violence in itself. It is an assault on the nervous system that rewires how a person experiences the world. 4 months after the shooting, employees returned to City Hall with a sense of hypervigilance, their eyes constantly darting to the exits, their hearts racing every time a heavy door slammed or a maintenance cart rattled across the stone floor. The open, welcoming atmosphere that had defined their workplace for decades had been poisoned, replaced by an underlying current of fear that changed the emotional fabric of their daily lives. Finally, the victim was the city of Edmonton itself, and the democratic principle of open access to government. For generations, City Hall was a place where any resident, regardless of their background or status, could walk through the front doors without passing through an armed checkpoint or a metal detector. It was a space designed to foster trust between the governing and the governed. When Sava unleashed his assault, he did not just damage glass and concrete, he severely wounded that trust. The attack forced the city to withdraw into a defensive posture, erecting physical barriers, installing security screeners, and restricting the free movement of the public. The true tragedy of this case is that an individual, consumed by an abstract hatred for global systems, succeeded in robbing a local community of its openness. The victim was the collective freedom of Edmontonians to view their local government as a safe, transparent house of the people, leaving behind a scarred building that now stands as a reminder of how easily peace can be compromised by a radicalized mind. The transition from a quiet winter morning to a scene of active terror inside Edmonton City Hall happened with a violent, instantaneous suddenness at exactly 10:30 a.m. Bezhani Sava, carrying the heavy canvas bag that concealed his dark intentions, had successfully navigated the cold, concrete labyrinth of the underground parking garage. Because he wore the official, structured jacket of a commissionaire's security guard, his presence did not trigger the instinctual suspicion of anyone he might have passed in those dim corridors. He looked like safety personified, a guardian of the peace, but underneath that fabric, he was a walking powder keg of radicalized fury. Emerging from the service stairwell onto the second floor of the public atrium, he stood for a brief moment in the shadow of the massive glass pyramid ceiling. The light filtering down was cold and gray, illuminating the open walkways that overlooked the grand lobby below. Without warning, Sava unzipped the bag, pulled the heavy, black SKS semi-automatic rifle into his grip, and cocked the weapon with a sharp, metallic clatter that would be the last sound of normalcy the building would know that day. The first pull of the trigger released a concussive blast that felt as though it shook the building's very foundation. The high-velocity round tore through the quiet air, slamming into the ceiling and sending a shower of white drywall dust drifting down like artificial snow. In the enclosed, stone-walled environment of the atrium, the sound did not just echo, it multiplied, creating a rolling, deafening roar that sounded to the terrified occupants like an entire platoon had breached the perimeter. Sava moved with a frantic, disjointed energy, pacing along the second-floor balcony while firing wildly into the architecture itself. He was not aiming at the human beings who were visible through the glass partitions, but rather at the structure that represented the state. With every rhythmic explosion of the rifle, heavy tempered glass panels shattered with musical but terrifying violence. The shards did not just fall, they exploded outward, cascading down to the main floor below like a glittering, lethal waterfall, raining razor-sharp debris onto the polished tile floors where people had been walking calmly just seconds prior. As the smoke began to rise, thick with the chemical stench of burnt gunpowder and cordite, Sava reached into his bag for his next weapon of terror. His hands, though trembling with a mix of adrenaline and ideological fervor, managed to ignite the gasoline-soaked rag protruding from the neck of a heavy glass bottle. The orange flame flared to life, casting a sinister, dancing shadow across his uniform. With a heavy, sweeping motion, he hurled the Molotov cocktail over the railing. The bottle sailed through the smoky air of the atrium before smashing violently onto the floor directly in front of the main elevator banks. The impact pulverized the glass, instantly unleashing a pressurized wave of burning gasoline that erupted into a roaring, blistering wall of fire. The heat was immediate and intense, blackening the stone walls and sending heavy, rolling ropes of toxic black smoke billowing up into the high rafters, triggering the building's fire alarms into a piercing, endless shriek that competed with the flashing white strobe lights. Inside the nearby committee room, Mayor Omajit Sohi and his staff were trapped in a waking nightmare. The initial shots had sounded like a structural collapse, but the unmistakable cadence of rapid gunfire and the sound of exploding glass quickly corrected their instincts. Everyone in the room threw themselves to the floor, seeking refuge beneath the heavy wooden desks as the vibrations of the attack rattled the pens and laptops above them. The air in the room grew warm and acrid as the smoke from the fire downstairs began to seep under the doors. A few corridors away, the situation was even more desperate. The first-grade class, caught completely in the open, was saved only by the fast, instinctual bravery of their teacher, who gathered the terrified, weeping children and shoved them into a cramped, dark storage locker. The children huddled together in the pitch black, their small hands covering their ears to block out the thunderous booms of the rifle and the mechanical screaming of the alarms, utterly helpless as the violence unfolded just yards from their hiding place. Then, just as suddenly as the violence had begun, the chaotic rhythm of the attack shifted into an eerie, suffocating silence. Sava, having emptied his magazine and let the fire rage below, abruptly stopped shooting. He let the heavy rifle drop against its sling, his chest heaving as he stood amidst the ruin of shattered glass and drifting smoke. Instead of fleeing or advancing toward the hidden occupants, he simply stood there, his ideological energy seemingly spent, waiting in the devastation he had wrought. It was at this exact moment of profound vulnerability that a lone, UN-armed commissionaire security officer, a real guardian of the building who happened to be on duty, showed a level of courage that defied human instinct. Hearing the silence, the guard did not wait for the tactical teams to arrive. He advanced through the smoke, stepped over the broken glass, and confronted the armed uniform-clad terrorist, calmly but firmly demanding his surrender. Sava, offering no further resistance, allowed himself to be tackled and pinned to the floor, bringing an end to the active assault just minutes before the heavily armed tactical units and bomb squads swarmed the building. The immediate aftermath of the final echo of gunfire left Edmonton City Hall trapped in a state of suspended terror, a vacuum of sound where the only remaining noises were the mechanical weeping of the fire alarms and the dripping of water from the emergency sprinklers. Within minutes of Bezhani Sava being pinned to the floor by the heroic, unarmed commissionaire, the heavy glass doors of the main entrance were shattered inward by the arriving tactical teams of the Edmonton Police Service. Officers dressed in full black body armor, carrying assault rifles and ballistic shields, swarmed the smoky atrium like an invading force. They moved in a synchronized, lethal ballet, clearing corners, securing hallways, and screaming orders for everyone to keep their hands visible. The air was so thick with gray gunpowder residue and the dark, oily smoke from the extinguished Molotov cocktail that the tactical officers' high-powered flashlights cut through the gloom like solid beams of white light, illuminating the thousands of floating dust motes and concrete particles that had been blasted into the air. Once the suspect was aggressively cuffed, searched, and dragged out through the rear exit into a waiting police cruiser, the true work of the forensic investigators began. The building was officially declared a massive, multi-level crime scene, and the Integration National Security Enforcement Team, INSET, was called in to assist due to the highly unusual nature of the attack. The first thing that struck the initial investigators as they stepped into the grand atrium was the sheer scale of the structural devastation. The polished stone floors, which usually gleamed under the natural light of the pyramid ceiling, were entirely obscured by a thick, crunchy blanket of shattered tempered glass and white drywall dust. Every step an investigator took resulted in a loud, echoing crunch that served as a grim reminder of how close this event had come to being a mass casualty disaster. The walls and ceilings were pockmarked with jagged, black holes where the high-velocity SKS rounds had punched through the plaster, exposing the metal studs underneath. As the forensic teams meticulously placed bright yellow evidence markers next to every item of interest, the true lethality of Sava's arsenal became terrifyingly clear. Laid out on the blackened tile floor near the elevator banks where the fire had been set were the primary tools of his planned destruction. Investigators carefully photographed and catalogued the rugged, wooden-stocked SKS semi-automatic rifle, its barrel still warm to the touch and smelling strongly of cordite. Next to it lay 3 prohibited overcapacity magazines, heavy and metallic, designed to hold far more ammunition than allowed by Canadian law, ensuring that the shooter could maintain a continuous, devastating rate of fire without pausing to reload. Scattered across the second-floor balcony and the stairs below were dozens of spent brass casings, glinting like gold teeth in the glare of the police floodlights, each one representing a moment of pure terror for the people hiding in the offices nearby. The discovery of the remaining unexploded incendiary devices sent a fresh wave of tension through the tactical teams, prompting an immediate evacuation of the immediate area until the bomb squad could verify their stability. Tucked neatly inside the heavy canvas bag that Sava had abandoned on the walkway were 3 remaining glass bottles, each one filled with an amber-colored fluid that smelled strongly of raw, unrefined gasoline. The necks of the bottles were stuffed with tightly twisted rags, makeshift wicks that had been carefully prepared in advance. The presence of these devices, combined with the one that had successfully been detonated against the elevator doors, proved to investigators that this was not a spontaneous outburst of anger, but a calculated, multi-phased assault intended to trap building occupants between a wall of fire and the trajectory of a high-powered rifle. The black soot from the single detonated bomb had crawled up the pristine walls, leaving a permanent, greasy shadow that looked like an open wound in the center of the civic building. While one team of officers focused on the physical ballistics and chemical components of the crime scene, another group of tech forensics investigators was already racing against time to secure Sava's digital footprint before it could be erased or altered online. It did not take long for them to hit their first major breakthrough. Just hours before he packed his bag and drove to the downtown core, Sava had uploaded a self-recorded video manifesto to his social media accounts, a digital confession that would fundamentally alter the direction of the entire investigation. In the video, which ran for nearly 5 minutes, Sava sat stiffly in a dimly lit room, looking directly into the camera lens with an eerie, unblinking intensity. He was wearing the exact same dark security uniform jacket that he would later wear during the shooting, an ideological armor that he believed lent legitimacy to his words. As the investigators listened to the playback in the command center, the quiet, measured tone of his voice contrasted sharply with the radical, destructive nature of his message. In the video, Sava spoke with a calm, almost detached cadence, explaining what he referred to as his mission to combat systemic injustice. He did not sound like a man suffering from a sudden, chaotic psychotic break. Instead, he sounded like someone who had spent months organizing his grievances into a rigid, unyielding worldview. He spoke directly about the crushing weight of the inflation crisis in Canada, the impossible cost of housing that was destroying the futures of young working-class citizens, and the general corruption he perceived within the political class. But his grievances did not stop at the municipal borders of Edmonton. He seamlessly tied these local economic hardships to massive, bleeding global conflicts, specifically mentioning the ongoing war in Gaza and expressing a profound, agonizing frustration with the lack of international intervention. He called upon the public to rise up, to reject the status quo, and explicitly instructed others to take up his mantle and continue his work if he were to fail or be captured during his assault on the city's democratic hub. This manifesto changed everything for the Edmonton Police Service and the federal investigators of the RCMP. The initial assumption that this might be an isolated workplace dispute or a random act of criminal mischief was instantly shattered by the contents of the tape. The evidence at the scene, the high-capacity magazines, the military-grade rifle, the chemical weapons, and the explicitly political video message, pointed to a much darker, much more complex reality. This was not a standard criminal act, it was a carefully orchestrated act of domestic terrorism designed to use violence to send a political message to the government and the public alike. As the first day of the investigation drew to a close and the sub-zero Edmonton night settled over the city, the forensic teams continued to work under the artificial lights, bagging evidence, tracing the serial numbers on the rifle, and realizing that the quiet prairie city of Edmonton had just become the latest front in a global war of radicalization. Following the secures of the physical crime scene and the initial analysis of the video manifesto, the investigation expanded into a sprawling, hyper-focused operation spearheaded by the Integrated National Security Enforcement Team. This specialized federal unit, composed of elite investigators from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and local intelligence officers, faced the immediate and monumental task of determining whether Bezhani Sava was a lone actor or the tip of a much larger, subterranean domestic terror cell. The primary objective during the critical first 72 hours was to map out every second of Sava's life leading up to the morning of January 23, 2024. Teams of plainclothes detectives fanned out across the city, executing search warrants at his residence, seizing his personal electronic devices, and initiating grueling, hours-long interviews with his family members, neighbors, and co-workers from the commissionaire's security firm. The atmosphere in the interrogation rooms was thick with tension as investigators pressed for any sign of a conspiracy, searching for any individual who might have provided the financial backing, logistical support, or ideological validation required to pull off such a brazen assault. As the digital forensics team began to dismantle Sava's online footprint, they initially found themselves staring into a vast, confusing labyrinth of dead ends and contradictions. His personal computer and encrypted messaging applications revealed a man who was deeply isolated, living a ghost-like existence in the digital realm. For weeks, the investigation seemed to hit a frustrating wall as tech experts tried to trace the origin of his radicalization. They looked for connections to known extremist groups, checking international watch lists and monitoring dark web forums where terrorist cells typically recruit vulnerable youth. However, the data returned nothing but silence. There were no coded messages from foreign handlers, no secret bank transfers from overseas entities, and no digital blueprints shared in underground chat rooms. Sava had not attended radical rallies, nor had he dropped any overt clues to his co-workers that would suggest he was capable of such violence. To his fellow security guards, he remained the quiet, unremarkable man who sat in empty lobbies, leading investigators to fear that they were chasing a shadow, an invisible network that perhaps existed only in the abstract spaces of the internet. This lack of institutional connection created a different kind of anxiety within the intelligence community, as a self-radicalized lone wolf is often far more difficult to detect and prevent than an organized group. Investigators spent days tracking the chain of custody for the SKS semi-automatic rifle and the 3 prohibited overcapacity magazines found at the scene. They combed through provincial gun registry databases, visited local firearms dealers, and cross-referenced black market weapon sales across Western Canada. Every lead they followed seemed to dry up in a maze of private sales and unrecorded transactions. A frustrating regulatory blind spot that offered no immediate answers as to how an ordinary security guard had managed to accumulate a military-grade arsenal alongside 150 rounds of live ammunition. The investigation was further complicated by the public's mounting panic. Rumors were flying through Edmonton that other civic buildings were targeted, forcing the police to spend valuable time chasing false alarms and clearing phantom threats while trying to pin down the true scope of Sava's ideological network. The breakthrough that finally pulled the investigation out of these frustrating blind alleys came from a microscopic analysis of Sava's financial records and internet search history in the months preceding the attack. Rather than looking for a massive, sudden conspiracy, data analysts began to notice a slow, methodical pattern of small, cash-based purchases at various hardware stores and gas stations across the Edmonton metropolitan area. By overlaying his cell phone tower pings with store surveillance footage, investigators were able to watch Sava in the weeks before January 23, calmly buying the specific glass bottles, the fuel, and the rags used to construct the Molotov cocktails. This painstaking process allowed the police to definitively rule out the involvement of an active, multi-person cell on the ground in Alberta. The evidence clearly demonstrated that while Sava's mind had been poisoned by a global cocktail of online grievances ranging from local housing inflation to the war in Gaza, the execution of the plot was entirely his own lonely, domestic enterprise. Allowing federal prosecutors to confidently build a case centered on an individual who had weaponized his professional uniform to wage a solo war against his own city's democratic institutions. The definitive turning point in the investigation came when the Integrated National Security Enforcement Team successfully bridged the gap between a standard criminal act and the formal legal definition of terrorism under Canadian law. For the first several weeks following the attack, the public and the media watched with bated breath as Bezhani Sava was held on a standard list of weapons and arson charges. But behind the secure doors of the RCMP headquarters, a much larger, more complex legal architecture was being constructed. The breakthrough was not found in a sudden physical discovery or a confession extracted in a dim interrogation room, but rather in the meticulous, frame-by-frame synchronization of Sava's digital manifesto with the physical mechanics of his assault. Analysts from the National Security Unit spent weeks dissecting the 5-minute video file, analyzing the cadence of his voice, the specific vocabulary he employed, and the political literature he had consumed online. They matched the exact moment he uploaded the video to the internet with the precise minute his vehicle entered the underground parking arcade at City Hall, establishing an unbreakable chain of intent that proved his actions were designed entirely to create a state of ideological terror. This forensic realization allowed federal prosecutors to take a step that is exceedingly rare in the Canadian justice system. In March 2024, the RCMP and the Public Prosecution Service of Canada officially announced that they were elevating the case to a national security matter, formally wrapping Sava's actions under the anti-terrorism provisions of the Criminal Code. This was the breakthrough that the community had been waiting for. It was a public acknowledgement that what had occurred was not a random act of workplace violence or a chaotic mental health crisis, but a calculated, politically motivated assault on the democratic structure of the province. By charging him with counseling the commission of a terrorism offense and possession of property for terrorist purposes, investigators effectively redefined the entire narrative of the case. They were now able to present a comprehensive, unified theory to the courts. Sava had used his position and his uniform as a security guard to gain access to a secure civic space, intending to use blood and fire to force a political conversation about global and domestic systems onto the public. Simultaneously, a secondary breakthrough occurred within the financial and logistical tracing units. By serving production orders to international tech companies and social media platforms, investigators managed to uncover a hidden, secondary cloud storage account belonging to Sava. Inside this encrypted digital vault, they discovered a series of text-based documents and unsent drafts that acted as a diary of his radicalization. These documents detailed his step-by-step planning process, including his notes on the building's layout, his calculations regarding how much ammunition he would need to suppress any immediate response, and his reflections on how the uniform of a commissionaire would grant him a crucial window of invisibility. This discovery effectively closed any potential loopholes or defense strategies that might argue he had acted on a sudden, unthinking impulse. The evidence was now absolute, painting a picture of a man who had spent months coldly calculating how to maximize the psychological damage of his attack, ensuring that when the case finally moved toward the grand halls of justice, the state would possess an unassailable mountain of proof. The legal battle over the Edmonton City Hall attack culminated within the imposing, wood-paneled courtrooms of the Court of King's Bench of Alberta, a setting that provided a stark, dignified contrast to the smoky chaos that Bezhani Sava had unleashed just months prior. From his very first appearances via video link from his maximum security holding cell, the atmosphere surrounding the proceedings was heavy with a profound sense of gravity. The Crown prosecutors, armed with the massive mountain of evidence compiled by the Integrated National Security Enforcement Team, were determined to ensure that the full weight of Canada's anti-terrorism laws would be felt. Sava sat behind the protective glass of the prisoner's box, his appearance vastly different from the uniform-clad radical who had paced the second-floor balcony of City Hall. Stripped of his tactical gear and his security jacket, he appeared smaller, quieter, and deeply ordinary, a stark visual reminder of how easily a destructive, global ideology can hide behind a mundane, unassuming human exterior. The legal strategy took a definitive turn in July 2024, when Sava's defense counsel stood before a packed courtroom to formally enter his plea. To the surprise of many in the public gallery who had expected a long, drawn-out trial detailing his grievances, the defense team entered a formal plea of not guilty to the 11 charges. While simultaneously exercising their constitutional right to select a trial by a judge and a full boy tham don. This choice set the stage for a high-stakes legal confrontation. As a jury trial meant that ordinary citizens of Edmonton, the very people whose peace had been shattered by the attack, would be tasked with listening to the evidence and deciding the fate of the man who had brought war to their doorstep. The presiding judge, recognizing the immense public interest and the sensitive national security implications of the case, repeatedly denied Sava's applications for bail, declaring that his release would not only pose a significant risk to public safety but would also severely undermine the public's confidence in the administration of justice. During the preliminary arguments and subsequent hearings that stretched deeper into the legal calendar, the Crown prosecutors systematically laid out their case, transforming the courtroom into a grim exhibition of the January 23 assault. They displayed the heavy, wooden-stocked SKS semi-automatic rifle on the evidence table, its black metal glinting under the sterile fluorescent lights of the courtroom. They played the audio recordings of the gunfire, allowing the deafening, rhythmic explosions to echo through the quiet room, forcing those in attendance to relive the terror of that morning. Most damaging of all was the presentation of Sava's own video manifesto. The prosecution played the tape on large monitors facing the jury box, letting Sava's calm, measured voice fill the room as he called for an ideological uprising and detailed his willingness to use violence to disrupt the state. This piece of evidence effectively dismantled any potential defense argument regarding a lack of criminal intent or a sudden, temporary loss of sanity, proving instead that the assault was a cold, calculated act of domestic terrorism. The defense, faced with an unassailable wall of physical and digital forensics, focused their efforts on contextualizing Sava's state of mind, attempting to humanize the young man without diminishing the gravity of his actions. They argued that his radicalization was the tragic byproduct of an extreme, isolating psychological vulnerability, exacerbated by the crushing social pressures of the economic crisis and the overwhelming psychological weight of viewing endless streams of global violence online. However, the legal definition of terrorism under the Criminal Code of Canada does not require a suspect to belong to an international network. It merely requires that the violent act be committed for a political, religious, or ideological purpose with the intent to intimidate the public. As the legal proceedings ground forward, the systemic strength of the justice system became the ultimate shield against the terror Sava had tried to sow, ensuring that his attempts to force a chaotic ideological conversation through blood and fire were met instead with the cold, unyielding precision of constitutional law and an eventual, definitive reckoning before the people of Alberta. The final resolution of the Bezhani Sava case left an indelible mark on the city of Edmonton, serving as a solemn case study in the modern mechanics of homegrown radicalization and the fragile nature of public trust. When Edmonton City Hall finally reopened its doors to the public after 2 months of intensive structural repairs and comprehensive security audits, the building was fundamentally transformed. The physical wounds, the shattered tempered glass, the pockmarked drywall, and the blackened tiles near the elevator banks had been expertly erased by construction crews working around the clock. Yet, the architectural spirit of the building had shifted permanently. The once celebrated openness of the Grand Glass Pyramid was now tempered by the sobering realities of 21st-century security. Citizens returning to the space were met with newly installed metal detectors, baggage screening stations, and restrictive access control barriers designed to protect civic workers from the very people they served. This defensive retreat was the true, lingering victory of Sava's plot. He had forced an open democracy to build walls against its own community. For the people who lived through those terrifying minutes on January 23, 2024, the conclusion of the legal process brought a quiet sense of closure but no easy answers. The first-grade children who had huddled in the darkness of a storage locker returned to their classrooms, but their parents and teachers carried the invisible burden of monitoring them for long-term psychological trauma, watching for the subtle ways fear can reshape a child's worldview. Mayor Amarjeet Sohi and the city councillors continued to debate municipal budgets and zoning bylaws, but the underlying sense of safety that had once defined local politics was gone, replaced by a permanent state of hypervigilance. The heroic, unnamed commissionaire who had stepped forward through the smoke to disarm Sava without a weapon became a symbol of the city's quiet resilience, a reminder that even in the face of ideological madness, individual courage remains the ultimate safeguard of a society's values. Ultimately, the story of the Edmonton City Hall shooting stands as a powerful, cautionary tale for a highly connected yet deeply fractured global society. It demonstrates with terrifying clarity how easily an ordinary young man, living a quiet life in a peaceful Canadian city, can have his mind completely consumed by a toxic cocktail of global and local grievances. Sava's journey from a reliable, uniform-wearing security guard to an armed terrorist highlights the profound danger of the digital echo chambers that proliferate across the internet, where economic anxieties regarding housing inflation can be seamlessly fused with distant, bloody geopolitical conflicts to justify an act of domestic war. The justice system of Alberta successfully held Sava accountable under the full weight of anti-terrorism laws, proving that the state would not tolerate violence as a form of political speech. But as the pale winter sun continues to shine down on the glass pyramid of City Hall, the true lesson of the tragedy remains: the peace of a community is not merely maintained by walls and weapons, but by the constant, deliberate effort to protect vulnerable minds from the dark currents of isolation and radicalization that run beneath the surface of modern life. The deep, lasting resonance of the Edmonton City Hall shooting extends far beyond the borders of Alberta, serving as a stark warning to democratic societies everywhere about the evolving architecture of modern security and human vulnerability. In the years following the attack, criminologists and national security experts have frequently pointed to Bezhani Sava as a prototypical example of the decentralized threat landscape. No longer do threat actors require a physical network, a training camp, or a direct link to an international organization to launch a devastating assault on a community. Instead, the combination of personal isolation, a uniform that grants unvetted access, and a digital connection to the world's most painful grievances can turn an ordinary citizen into an ideological combatant overnight. This evolution forces us to re-examine not just how we protect our physical spaces, but how we monitor the invisible health of our communities, recognizing that the early signs of radicalization are often buried deep within the silent, ordinary routines of daily life. As the physical structure of City Hall continues to stand as a monument to local government, it also serves as a living laboratory for how a society attempts to balance safety with freedom. The introduction of checkpoints and metal detectors was an immediate, necessary reaction to a crisis, but the long-term challenge for Edmontonians has been ensuring that these barriers do not permanently alienate the public from the democratic process. True security cannot exist in a vacuum of suspicion. It requires a continuous, deliberate effort to foster a sense of shared responsibility and mutual trust between the governing and the governed. The fact that no one was physically killed on that freezing January morning remains a monumental relief, but it should not dilute the seriousness of the event. It stands as a profound wake-up call, a moment where a community was granted a second chance to look closely at the fractures within its own social fabric and to address the underlying isolation that allows such destructive ideologies to take root. Looking back on the entirety of this dark chapter, The ultimate takeaway is a testament to the strength of a community that refused to let terror define its future. The shattered glass has been replaced, the smoke has cleared, and the democratic debates that Sava attempted to silence with gunfire continue to echo through the halls of local government every single week. By confronting the violence with the calm, methodical force of the justice system and honoring the quiet bravery of the everyday citizens who stood up to protect one another, Edmonton demonstrated that the core values of an open, compassionate society are far more resilient than the concrete and glass that house them. The story of the Edmonton City Hall plot is a reminder that while the threat of ideological violence is a permanent reality of our modern, interconnected world, our greatest defense will always be our willingness to look out for one another, to protect the spaces where we gather, and to reject the chaotic notion that blood and fire can ever rewrite the laws of a free people. The final perspective on the Edmonton City Hall incident forces an examination of the systemic lessons learned by security agencies and municipal governments across North America. In the months and years following the legal resolution of Bezhani Sava's trial, the attack became a foundational case study for internal security audits, specifically targeting the phenomenon known as the insider threat. Sava's ability to navigate the secure perimeter of a government building while wearing the official uniform of an active security guard exposed a critical vulnerability in modern infrastructure defense. It demonstrated that traditional security models, which focus heavily on identifying outside intruders and establishing rigid external perimeters, are largely ineffective when the threat originates from an individual who possesses the credentialing, the uniform, and the institutional familiarity to bypass initial scrutiny. This realization prompted private security firms and public infrastructure managers to completely overhaul their internal vetting processes, implementing continuous psychological monitoring, more rigorous background checks, and stricter control measures for uniform distribution and workplace access. Furthermore, the Edmonton City Hall plot ignited a critical national conversation regarding the regulation and modification of semi-automatic firearms and high-capacity magazines within Canada. The presence of the SKS rifle and 3 prohibited overcapacity magazines at the crime scene served as a stark reminder of the persistent challenges law enforcement faces in controlling the flow of illicit weaponry. Despite stringent federal gun control legislation, the black market and private, unregulated sales continue to provide determined individuals with access to military-grade firepower. Police departments and federal tracking units were forced to adapt, dedicating greater resources to dismantling the underground networks that facilitate the alteration and distribution of magazines designed to bypass legal capacity limits. The legislative debates that followed the attack emphasized that physical security measures inside public buildings must be accompanied by proactive, intelligence-driven efforts to restrict access to the tools of mass violence. Recognizing that a single loophole can have catastrophic consequences for an entire community. Ultimately, the enduring legacy of this tragedy is found in the collective resilience of the city of Edmonton and its refusal to allow an act of ideological terror to permanently dictate the terms of its civic life. While the security environment within City Hall remains permanently altered, the fundamental commitment to public access and democratic transparency has survived the assault. The building continues to serve as a gathering place for citizens, a venue for peaceful protest, and a hub for local governance, proving that the psychological scar left by Bezhani Sava did not paralyze the community. By processing the trauma through open dialogue, strengthening the physical protections of public servants without entirely shutting out the public, and reaffirming the rule of law through a rigorous judicial process, the city demonstrated how a modern democracy absorbs a crisis. The events of January 23, 2024, will always remain a dark chapter in the history of Alberta, but they also serve as a permanent testament to the fact that the unity, courage, and shared values of a free people are far more durable than the violent delusions of a radicalized mind. As the years have pushed the events of January 23, 2024, deeper into Edmonton's history, the broader social implications of the case have continued to shape how public institutions address the intersecting crises of mental health, economic despair, and ideological extremism. The case of Bezhani Sava highlighted a growing, dangerous trend in modern sociology where a citizen's personal sense of failure and financial stagnation is easily weaponized by a saturated media environment. 4 months following the legal conclusion of the case, community leaders, psychologists, and social advocates in Western Canada engaged in intense discussions about the invisible vulnerabilities plaguing young, working-class men who feel entirely disconnected from the promise of a stable future. The economic anxieties that Sava outlined in his video manifesto, the crushing weight of inflation, the impossibility of finding affordable housing, and a deep-seated distrust of political leadership, were not unique to him. They were shared by thousands of everyday citizens who were quietly struggling to navigate a changing world. The tragedy lay in how those common, valid frustrations were allowed to curdle in isolation, transformed by online algorithms into a destructive, violent hatred that targeted the very heart of the local community. This realization prompted a profound shift in how local support networks and social institutions approach the concept of community resilience, moving beyond traditional law enforcement to focus on proactive social intervention. Programs were developed across Alberta to provide young people with healthy, constructive outlets to express political dissent and process systemic frustrations, aiming to dismantle the profound sense of isolation that serves as the primary breeding ground for domestic extremism. Educational initiatives were introduced to help families and co-workers identify the subtle, quiet signs of a person withdrawing into dangerous online subcultures. Recognizing that the most effective way to prevent an attack on a public building is to intervene in the quiet moments before a weapon is ever acquired. The collective goal became ensuring that no individual, regardless of their background or struggles, would feel so utterly abandoned by the system that they would view a military rifle and a bag of fire as their only remaining means of being heard by the world. Now, as visitors look up at the massive glass pyramid ceiling of Edmonton City Hall, watching the pale northern light filter down into the grand atrium, the space feels both historic and contemporary. The physical barriers and security checkpoints have become a routine, integrated part of daily civic life, a compromise that the city accepted in order to keep its democratic institutions functioning safely in an unpredictable age. The first-grade students who lived through that terrifying morning are growing older, moving forward with their lives, supported by a community that refused to let their futures be dictated by a single hour of terror. The story of the Edmonton City Hall shooting serves as a permanent, living reminder that peace is not a passive condition, but an active, daily pursuit that requires vigilance, empathy, and an unwavering commitment to one another. By choosing to face the darkness of radicalization with the bright light of justice, open communication, and social reform, the people of Edmonton proved that the truest measure of a city's strength is its capacity to heal, to protect its people, and to ensure that its public spaces remain a sanctuary for the values of democracy and human dignity. The deep structural modifications triggered by the Edmonton City Hall shooting extended into the realm of digital intelligence and public communication strategies across Canada. In the immediate aftermath of Bezhani Sava's brief but highly disruptive assault, federal intelligence analysts noted a critical flaw in how modern communication networks handle the immediate spread of extremist propaganda during an active crisis. The 5-minute video manifesto that Sava uploaded shortly before entering the parkade had circulated through various online channels for several crucial hours before major platforms could coordinate a comprehensive takedown. This delay allowed the digital message to be archived, dissected, and praised by fringe groups operating in the darker corners of the internet, showcasing how modern attackers can successfully use algorithmic amplification to project their localized violence onto a global stage. The realization that an attacker could so easily weaponize mainstream social media infrastructure to justify an assault on a municipal government forced Canadian digital security agencies to establish faster, more direct lines of communication with international tech conglomerates. Developing automated protocols designed to immediately quarantine and suppress self-recorded manifestos during ongoing public safety emergencies. Simultaneously, the municipal government of Edmonton faced the delicate task of restoring the emotional and cultural value of City Hall as a neutral, inclusive community space. For decades, the grand atrium under the glass pyramid had served not only as a political hub, but as a vibrant cultural center where local artists exhibited their work, cultural groups celebrated heritage weeks, and citizens from all walks of life gathered to escape the brutal winter cold. The trauma of January 23 threatened to turn the building into a sterile, unwelcoming fortress, defined entirely by the metal detectors and the presence of armed security personnel at the entrances. To counter this creeping alienation, city planners and community organizers deliberately launched a series of public events aimed at reclaiming the space, inviting local musicians, cultural performers, and community leaders to fill the atrium with life, art, and open dialogue. This intentional revitalization effort was a crucial component of the city's collective healing process, demonstrating that the ultimate antidote to ideological violence is not complete isolation, but a stubborn, public commitment to maintaining the vibrant, inclusive social fabric that the attacker had tried so desperately to destroy. As time moves forward, the legal, architectural, and social precedents set by the Edmonton City Hall plot continue to serve as a vital reference point for urban centers navigating the complex anxieties of the modern era. The case effectively demonstrated that the safety of a modern city cannot be guaranteed by physical barriers alone. It requires a sophisticated, multi-layered approach that integrates digital intelligence, proactive community mental health support, and an unyielding defense of democratic accessibility. The individuals who stood inside the building on that freezing Tuesday morning have integrated that experience into their personal histories, moving forward with a deeper appreciation for the fragile nature of public peace and the immense value of everyday courage. The story of this averted mass tragedy ultimately leaves behind a legacy of profound resilience, proving that when a community refuses to succumb to fear, rejects the divisive rhetoric of extremism, and systematically reaffirms its core values through justice and empathy, it can emerge from the smoke of an attack stronger, more united, and more deeply committed to protecting the open, democratic spaces that belong to all citizens. The evolution of the Edmonton City Hall shooting plot into a historic case study of domestic extremism has led to a profound reassessment of the role of private security operators in municipal defense frameworks. In the years following the legal conclusion of the Bezhani-Sava case, security analysts across Canada began to scrutinize the deep psychological vulnerabilities inherent in the contract security industry. Security guards are often the first line of defense for public infrastructure, yet they frequently endure low wages, long periods of social isolation, and a distinct lack of long-term career progression. When an individual like Sava spends years standing in the quiet corridors of corporate and civic real estate, watching the world pass by through a lens of personal financial stagnation, the uniform can shift from a symbol of societal protection into an ironic shroud of personal resentment. This specific dynamic prompted the industry to establish more comprehensive mental health networks and radicalization awareness training, ensuring that the individuals trusted to wear the uniform and protect public property are also being monitored for the quiet internal fractures that can transform a guardian into a threat. At the same time, the local community in Edmonton began to look inward at the broader implications of how global geopolitical conflicts are internalized by a diverse, immigrant-rich population. Edmonton has long prided itself on being a safe haven for individuals fleeing violence and political instability from all corners of the globe, creating a vibrant cultural mosaic within the prairies of Alberta. However, the Sava incident demonstrated that the trauma of international conflicts cannot always be left at the border. It can travel across oceans through digital networks, embedding itself in the minds of young citizens who feel an agonizing, helpless disconnect between their peaceful lives in Canada and the horrific violence occurring in their ancestral homelands. To address this complex psychological reality, cultural associations and municipal groups in the city initiated deep, multi-generational dialogues focused on providing peaceful, constructive pathways for international solidarity, aiming to ensure that the intense grief and frustration caused by global tragedies are channeled into humanitarian advocacy rather than localized, domestic violence. Today, as the daily operations of Edmonton City Hall move forward under the watchful eyes of enhanced security details, the building stands as a living testament to the endurance of democratic institutions under pressure. The memory of the high-velocity rifle fire and the blistering heat of the Molotov cocktail has faded into the architectural history of the structure, but the lessons learned on that freezing January morning remain permanently etched into the city's operational DNA. The administrative staff, the journalists, and the elected officials who returned to work under the glass pyramid ceiling did so with a renewed understanding of the immense value of their public service and the inherent risks of maintaining an open government in an age of unpredictable radicalization. By refusing to let fear dictate the design of their civic home, and by continuously opening their doors to the community despite the scars of the past, the people of Edmonton proved that the truest measure of public safety is not the thickness of the walls we build, but the unyielding strength of our commitment to an inclusive, transparent, and democratic society. The long-term institutional memory of the Edmonton City Hall attack has significantly influenced the training curriculum for municipal law enforcement and emergency response teams across Western Canada. In the aftermath of the legal proceedings surrounding Bezhani Sava, tactical units began to study the incident as a prime example of rapid, non-linear escalation within a highly vulnerable public space. The traditional protocols for an active shooter scenario often assume a predatory trajectory where the attacker intends to maximize casualties until stopped by force. However, Sava's sudden transition from violent arson and chaotic gunfire to immediate compliance and surrender introduced a complex psychological variable into tactical training modules. Officers are now trained to recognize the distinct behavioral patterns of ideologically spent individuals, preparing frontline responders to rapidly transition from high-intensity tactical intervention to secure containment and forensic preservation without escalating the situation into further bloodshed, a tactical pivot that was crucial in ensuring no lives were lost on that chaotic January morning. Simultaneously, the city's architectural and design departments began exploring innovative ways to seamlessly integrate ballistic protection into public spaces without compromising the aesthetic and democratic values of open government. The extensive 2-month closure of City Hall allowed engineers to replace the shattered glass elements with advanced, reinforced polymers that possess high-impact resistance while remaining entirely transparent to the naked eye. This subtle, defensive upgrade represents a broader philosophical shift in urban planning, where security is woven directly into the structural materials of a building rather than relying entirely on visible, imposing barriers that project an atmosphere of fear and exclusion. By reinforcing the interior walkways and administrative corridors with covert protective materials, Edmonton managed to preserve the visual promise of a transparent house of the people, demonstrating that a modern city can fortify its democratic institutions against ideological violence without sacrificing the architectural beauty and openness that define its civic identity. As the community moves further away from the immediate shock of the 2024 assault, the collective resilience displayed by Edmontonians continues to serve as an enduring blueprint for societal healing in the face of domestic extremism. The event serves as a permanent reminder that the defense of a city's peace does not rest solely on the shoulders of tactical teams or the height of security checkpoints, but on the daily, microscopic acts of community vigilance, empathy, and mutual support that define a healthy democracy. The municipal workers who returned to their desks beneath the glass pyramid did so not as victims of a radicalized plot, but as guardians of a living democratic tradition that refused to be intimidated by blood and fire. By continuing to hold public forums, welcoming school groups, and maintaining an inclusive environment despite the scars of the past, the people of Edmonton successfully turned a moment of profound vulnerability into a lasting testament to the strength, unity, and unyielding endurance of their shared civic values. The psychological ripple effects of the Edmonton City Hall shooting plot also catalyzed a profound transformation in how Canadian workplaces, particularly public sector environments, handle employee mental health and the subtle markers of ideological distress. Following the formal conclusion of Bezhani Sava's legal proceedings, human resource specialists and occupational psychologists began using the case to study the phenomenon of quiet radicalization within standard institutional framework. Sava had managed to maintain his professional standing as a licensed, dependable security guard for years, hiding his growing internal darkness beneath a routine of punctuality and compliance. This forced a massive re-evaluation of traditional workplace safety protocols, shifting the focus from merely reacting to overt behavioral red flags toward proactively fostering deep, meaningful mental health support structures within the workplace. Organizations across Alberta began implementing comprehensive wellness checking systems and peer support networks designed to combat the profound, creeping sense of social and economic alienation that often acts as the initial catalyst for extremist thoughts. Ensuring that employees who feel abandoned by systemic pressures have a safe, institutional avenue to seek help before their frustrations turn toward violence. Concurrently, the incident prompted local media outlets and journalistic organizations across Western Canada to engage in a rigorous self-examination regarding their coverage of domestic terrorism and ideological manifestos. The rapid dissemination of Sava's video manifesto in the initial hours of the attack highlighted the delicate balance journalists must strike between informing the public and denying a violent actor the digital megaphone they desire. In the years that followed, local newsrooms established stricter ethical guidelines for reporting on true crime and domestic plots, deliberately choosing to de-emphasize the theatrical elements of the crime, limit the replaying of radical manifestos, and focus instead on the systemic investigations and the resilience of the impacted community. This shift in journalistic focus was aimed directly at neutralizing the contagion effect, preventing future troubled individuals from viewing a violent assault on a civic building as a viable method to achieve instant, historical notoriety on the internet. Today, the everyday life moving through Edmonton City Hall reflects a mature, balanced society that has absorbed a profound shock without losing its essential character. The security screeners, the automated metal detectors, and the modern protective glass partitions are accepted not as symbols of a fearful government, but as practical, realistic concessions required to ensure that the open democratic process can continue uninterrupted in a complex, modern age. The administrative assistants, the visiting citizens, and the city officials who gather beneath the sweeping glass pyramid carry out their daily routines with an underlying, grounded understanding of how valuable and fragile their civic peace truly is. By choosing to counter an act of ideological fire with the calm, systematic application of justice, social empathy, and structural reform, Edmonton did not merely repair a building, it reinforced the invisible, democratic pillars that hold the entire community together, ensuring that its House of the People remains a safe, vibrant sanctuary for generations to come. The systemic shock of the Edmonton City Hall plot ultimately forced a deep reassessment of the relationship between municipal immigration settlement programs and long-term social integration efforts across Western Canada. In the wake of the investigative breakthroughs that mapped out Bezhani Sava's quiet path toward extremism, social scientists and policy advisors began to point out a critical gap in how civic integration is maintained over a person's lifespan. While initial settlement services heavily focus on the immediate, tangible needs of newcomers such as language training, housing placement, and initial employment, there had been a historical lack of structural support for navigating the long-term psychological and cultural pressures that emerge years down the line. Sava had lived in Canada for a significant period, moving through the motions of an ordinary life, yet he remained fundamentally untethered from a deep, anchoring sense of community identity. This specific vulnerability allowed him to look past his immediate Canadian surroundings and completely submerge his consciousness in a toxic, digital reality where global atrocities and local economic hardships were twisted into a mandate for domestic violence. To address this complex, modern form of alienation, community organizations in Edmonton and throughout Alberta began redesigning their outreach frameworks, shifting from basic settlement logistics to the cultivation of deep civic belonging and digital literacy. New initiatives were established to engage young working-class adults in continuous, multi-generational dialogues where they could safely voice their frustrations regarding inflation, housing, and international human rights without falling prey to the radicalizing algorithms of extremist online echo chambers. These programs were built on the understanding that the most effective barrier against a radicalized mind is a robust, inclusive community that listens, validates, and channels emotional distress into productive, peaceful civic advocacy. By actively pulling isolated individuals out of the cold shadows of the internet and inviting them into the tangible, shared work of local community building, Edmonton sought to neutralize the very roots of domestic terror before it could ever manifest in the purchase of a weapon or the construction of an incendiary device. As the city moves further into the late 2020s, the enduring memory of the January 23 assault serves as a permanent baseline for modern urban resilience. The daily hum of activity beneath the grand glass pyramid of City Hall has returned to its vibrant, historical rhythm, showing no outward signs of the violence that once threatened to tear it apart. The strict security measures at the doors have transitioned from a jarring, reactionary presence into a quiet, institutional norm, a realistic acknowledgement of the complexities of protecting public spaces in an interconnected world. Yet, the true safety of the building is not found in the reinforced polymers of the windows or the sensitivity of the metal detectors, but in the unyielding democratic spirit of the people who occupy it every day. By refusing to retreat into a permanent posture of fear, and by continuously choosing to meet an act of ideological fire with the deliberate, transformative power of justice, social empathy, and community reform, Edmonton did not merely salvage a building, it built a stronger, more united house of the people that stands as an enduring sanctuary for democracy, openness, and human dignity. The long-term resolution of the Bezhani-Sava investigation also prompted a major overhaul in how municipal governments coordinate emergency communication with the public during an active threat inside a civic landmark. On the morning of the attack, as the sound of high-powered rifle fire echoed through the atrium, rumors and unverified information spread through digital messaging apps long before official statements could be released by law enforcement. This information vacuum created a secondary wave of panic across the downtown core of Edmonton, with neighboring office towers going into spontaneous lockdowns and transit lines gridlocking as citizens tried to flee a threat whose dimensions were still entirely unknown. Recognizing this vulnerability, the Edmonton Police Service, in coordination with provincial emergency management agencies, developed a streamlined, real-time crisis communication protocol. This system was designed to instantly broadcast localized, verified alerts to the mobile devices of anyone within a specific geographic radius of a public emergency, offering clear instruction and neutralizing the chaotic, speculative digital noise that modern attackers rely on to multiply the psychological impact of their violence. At the same time, the legal community in Canada began to view the Sava case as a critical precedent for how the courts interpret the intersection of economic desperation and ideological radicalization. During the sentencing phases and subsequent legal analyses, jurists and legal scholars noted that the defense's attempt to frame Sava's actions purely as a symptom of the modern cost-of-living crisis was a strategy that could have dangerous implications if accepted by the courts. The Canadian judicial system had to send an unequivocal message that while systemic economic hardships, such as housing inflation and financial stagnation, are deeply painful realities that demand political solutions, they can never be used to mitigate or excuse a calculated act of domestic terrorism. By firmly rejecting any arguments that sought to dilute the political and ideological nature of the assault, the Court of King's Bench established a clear legal boundary. Reinforcing the principle that the moment an individual chooses to resolve their societal grievances through the barrel of a military rifle and chemical explosives, they transition from a frustrated citizen into an enemy of the democratic state, subject to the full, uncompromising weight of anti-terrorism laws. Today, as the daily routine of city planners, community organizers, and visiting citizens moves through the grand atrium of Edmonton City Hall, the structure feels both reinforced and reclaimed. The quiet, professional security screeners at the entrance gates have become as ordinary a sight as the winter coats hung in the lobby, a realistic and mature adaptation to the security requirements of the modern era. The deep psychological scars that once threatened to paralyze the civic workforce have slowly transformed into a collective narrative of resilience. A shared memory of a day when the worst instincts of ideological radicalization were thoroughly defeated by individual bravery and institutional stability. By choosing to rebuild their house of the people without sacrificing its essential character of transparency, and by meeting a destructive act of ideological fire with the calm, systematic, and transformative power of constitutional justice and community care, the people of Edmonton ensured that their city would not be defined by the smoke of a terrorist's bomb, but by the enduring, brilliant light of their shared democratic values. The deep, historical reflection on the Edmonton City Hall shooting plot ultimately leads to a fundamental contemplation on the nature of peace in the digital age. As we look back at the chaotic minutes of January 23, 2024, and the years of intense legal, social, and structural evolution that followed, it becomes clear that the attack was a symptom of a much larger, global condition. Bezhani-Sava did not construct his radical worldview in a vacuum, nor did he gather his anger from the tangible, snowy streets of Alberta alone. He was a product of a hyperconnected world where a lone individual, sitting in a dark room thousands of miles away from a conflict zone, can absorb the collective grief and violence of the entire planet through a glowing screen until it completely warps their perception of reality. The crushing local economic pressures he felt, combined with the agonizing images of global warfare, created a volatile psychological cocktail that transformed an ordinary security guard into an agent of domestic terror. His story is a powerful reminder that in the modern era, the conventional boundaries between international geopolitics and local community safety have completely dissolved, making the defense of our public spaces a matter of digital vigilance as much as physical protection. The true victory of the city of Edmonton over this act of ideological violence was not found in the swift response of the tactical teams or the technical upgrades to the building's infrastructure, but in the stubborn, unyielding preservation of its democratic character. When Sava opened fire and unleashed his incendiary bombs, his ultimate goal was to induce a state of permanent fear, to force the government to retreat into an inaccessible fortress, and to shatter the open, transparent bond between the city's leaders and its citizens. By choosing to carefully repair the glass pyramid, update safety protocols covertly, and open the doors wide to the public once again, Edmonton thoroughly defeated the terrorists' true intent. The building remains a vibrant, bustling sanctuary where first-grade children still go on field trips to learn about democracy, where civic workers drink their morning coffee without fear, and where open public debate continues to shape the future of the province. The invisible pillars of empathy, justice, and community resilience proved to be far stronger than any high-velocity bullet or chemical fire. As this true crime chronicle comes to its absolute conclusion, the narrative leaves behind a profound lesson for societies navigating the deep, unpredictable anxieties of the 21st century. It stands as a solemn testament to the fact that public safety is not a static destination achieved by building thicker walls or erecting higher barriers, but an active, daily practice rooted in social cohesion, proactive mental health support, and an uncompromising defense of democratic accessibility. The memory of the Edmonton City Hall plot will always endure as a dark baseline in the history of Western Canada, a stark reminder of how easily peace can be compromised by a radicalized mind. But more importantly, it will stand as a permanent monument to human courage, institutional stability, and the enduring truth that when a free people refuse to succumb to fear, reject the toxic rhetoric of isolation, and systematically choose justice over chaos, their shared civic house will always remain safe, open, and brilliant against the cold.